Technically, we'll be working out of exercise 23, the survey of kingdoms today, but really we're going to be working on exercise 23 for 3 weeks. Truthfully, we won't really be using the book. There's a handout that starts with exercise 23a, taxonomy, bacteria, protists, fungi, be able to identify organisms, taxons, and characteristics on this handout. You probably want to have a copy of that handout handy. It may be on Blackboard. Your instructor may have emailed it to you. Check with your instructor if you don't have the handout, because you're gonna need that one. Many instructors do have a pre-lab assignment for all of our labs this semester. This is not the pre-lab. This is the actual lab exercise. You may still need to answer your usual 5 questions on Blackboard to get your 5 points. Well, for my class anyway. Check with your instructor as to what you need to do for your pre-lab, if any. You will need to be able to identify organisms, taxons, and characteristics on the handout. Make sure you have the handout printed out. You'll be filling that out as we go along. So what's a taxon? A taxon is going to be a level in the classification system. There are generally 7 taxons: kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. Yes, you do need to know them in their particular, I hate to say order because that's on there. You do need to know them in their particular sequence. Kingdom is a very general taxon and includes all sorts of different things. If you're talking about the animal kingdom, it's got sponges and earthworms and cats and dogs, all the way up to us humans. On the other hand, the further down the chart you go, the more specific things are. Species is going to be the most specific taxon. By the time you get to us Homo sapiens, that's the only critter that's in that taxon would be us humans. Since you do need to remember the taxons in their particular sequence, there are a few mnemonic devices to help you remember things. One of them is to make up a word using the same first letters. Yeah, K, P, C, O, F, G, S, that's just not going to work. Another thing to do is to make up a little sentence using words with the same first letters, and then you could put them in their particular sequence. One mnemonic device to remember the levels of taxonomy is kindly pay cash or furnish good services. Really? No, that's not a great one anymore in this day and age of credit cards, so we'll try some others. A second mnemonic device to remember the levels is King Philip cried out for good ships. Now you'll have to talk to your local history major or professor as to why King Philip of France is waging a naval war when he has no battleships, but apparently, true story, King Philip did cry out for good ships. It at least puts the taxons in their proper sequence for you. Another cute little sentence, King Philip cried out for good sex. Okay, no explanation needed on that one. Whatever one you can use to remember the taxons in their particular sequence works for me. My favorite, kids playing chicken on freeways get squished. Okay, Yeah, maybe we better go back to King Philip. When scientists classify organisms, they're kind of playing a 20 questions game. If you were playing 20 questions, you'd probably start, somebody would think of an item and you'd probably ask, is it an animal or a plant? Does it have these characteristics or that characteristics? Scientists will do much the same thing classifying these organisms. Scientists will start with prokaryotic cells versus eukaryotic cells. Prokaryotic cells lack a nucleus. Eukaryotic cells have a nucleus, and that's a big distinguishing factor in our various kingdoms. Another thing scientists will look at is how many cells does the organism have. If an organism is prokaryotic, then it goes in one particular kingdom. There's 4 other kingdoms. So the next question is probably, is it unicellular or multicellular? Unicellular would have 1 cell and the organism would go in kingdom Protista. If the organism is multicellular, it has more than 1 cell and goes in one of the other 3 kingdoms. In that case, we'd have to keep asking questions to figure out which kingdom it does go in. Many bacteria and other unicellular organisms will reproduce using asexual reproduction. That's when the offspring comes from a single organism. It basically does something like mitosis. It duplicates its DNA, it gets bigger, it splits into 2 genetically identical organisms. This is really great if you've got rapid growth in stable environments. Not the stable where you park your horsey, but a stable, continuous, same environment. As long as you've got the same environment, it's great that you've got the same genetics. And generally, the bacteria can reproduce very quickly, so it's good for rapid growths in stable, normal, unchanging environments. On the other hand, most multicellular organisms will reproduce using sexual reproduction, where the new organism comes from combining the genetic material of 2 different organisms. Boy meets girl, sperm meets egg. The resulting new baby would be a combination of the genetic material and not identical to either parent. This has advantages especially if you've got changing environments. Changing genetics is great for changing environments. Maybe not so good if you've got stable environments, but if your environment changes, it's good to change your genetics. Maybe something is better suited to adapt to the new environment. One of the kingdoms we'll be talking about today involves some bacteria. And bacteria come in 3 primary shapes, although there's a whole bunch of different secondary shapes out there. You should know these 3 shapes. Coccus is going to be round. It's a little hard to see in the picture, but there's a whole bunch of little round, kind of reddish purple dots. Bacillus refers to rod-shaped. Usually rod-shaped bacteria are longer than they are wide. On the more purple bacteria, it looks like teeny tiny little pencils. Spiralia would be some spiral-shaped bacteria. Sometimes some of these bacterial shapes appear in some of the names. You might have heard of Staphylococcus aureus. It does have coccus in the title because it is a little round bacteria. You might have heard of Bacillus anthracus. Ooh, causes anthrax. Bad thing, but it is a rod-shaped bacteria. Several of the bacteria that are spiral-shaped have spiralia in the title, but you've probably never heard of those bacteria. A couple of the spiral-shaped bacteria that you have heard of, the ones that cause syphilis, those don't have spiral in the title. Oh well, spiralia is still spiral. Bacteria also come in 2 major arrangements. Staph refers to clusters, while strep refers to chains. Staphylococcus aureus was a round bacteria, but it also exists in clusters. That's what's shown in the picture on the pinky purple bacteria there. Streptococcus pyogenes is still around bacteria, but it exists in chains and causes strep throat. From here on out, we'll be looking at specimens and filling out the handout with the kingdom and the characteristics of the kingdom, and the phylum and the characteristics of the phylum. Wait a minute, those were two different characteristics. On the following slides, the characteristics go with the taxon that's in bold. So if the kingdom's in bold, the characteristics go with the kingdom. If the phylum's in bold, the characteristics go with the phylum. I'll show you a few examples so you can make sure you know what you're doing. If you get lost, back up a little bit or contact your instructor for more details. Normally, we'd be looking at specimens in the lab, but this semester we'll be looking at pictures online. The first kingdom that we're looking at is kingdom Monera. The characteristics are prokaryotic and unicellular. Hopefully you remember prokaryotic lacks a nucleus and unicellular is a one-celled organism. Examples include bacteria like E. coli, Helicobacter pylori, and some blue-green algae like nostoc. Now, on your handout, there's a spot for the example, E. coli. That is going to be in kingdom Monera. The first kingdom box is a little square. It does need to say Monera. The characteristics. Remember the characteristics on this slide, prokaryotic and unicellular, go with the taxon in bold, kingdom Monera. So the first big rectangle kind of in the middle of the page there does need to say prokaryotic and unicellular. Hey, there's a spot for phylum and characteristics. Yeah, we'll be going to the next slide in just a second. The next little box on the handout is the phylum and its characteristics. On the slide, you can see we're talking about E. coli and Staphylococcus aureus. They are still in kingdom Monera, but they're also in Phylum Bacteria. Note, Phylum Bacteria is in bold, so the characteristics of bacteria that live in normal conditions do go with the phylum. Phylum Bacteria, and then the second rectangle for the characteristics needs bacteria that live in normal conditions. Hey, what's up with this Staph aureus? It's not like it's on the handout anywhere. No, it's just another bacteria you might have heard of. Don't study the Staphylococcus too much. If it's not on the handout, it won't be on the exam. At this point, you should have the first row of your chart filled in. It already had E. coli. You should have written Monera in the first square, prokaryotic and unicellular in the first rectangle, bacteria in the second square, bacteria that live in normal conditions in the third square. Oh, sorry, second rectangle. Whichever. On the second row is Helicobacter pylori. Thank God it's not an oral exam, you just have to recognize the words. It is in kingdom Monera. You should probably write Monera again. The characteristics for kingdom Monera? Oh, those are still prokaryotic and unicellular. You can write that again, or you can just leave the ditto marks that are in there. Helicobacter pylori is in Phylum Archaea. The characteristics would be ancient bacteria that live in extreme conditions. Be sure to write the phylum and the characteristics on the second row. The PowerPoint also says that Helicobacter pylori lives in stomach acid and causes ulcers. There's no spot to write that down. Do we need to know that? No, there's not anything on Helicobacter pylori and stomach acid and ulcers on the handout. You do not need to know that. However, if it jogs your memory because stomach acid is an extreme condition, that might be helpful. You can always write it as a footnote at the bottom, but no, it's not on the lab exam. At this point, your chart should look something like this. I'm not reading the whole thing, but your chart should look something like this. If it doesn't, back up and try again, or contact your instructor for more details. Nostoc is in kingdom Monera, which is still prokaryotic and unicellular. It's in Phylum Cyanobacteria. Note the bold phylum, so the characteristics are the characteristics of the phylum. These characteristics would be blue-green algae that does photosynthesis. Why it looks more brownish green in the picture? I don't know. It's blue-green in real life. On the fourth line, with the amoeba, we get to a second kingdom. This one is kingdom Protista. Does go in the first square. The first rectangle has characteristics of unicellular, motile, and eukaryotic. These are going to be some one-celled organisms. Motile means they move, and eukaryotic still means they have a nucleus. There's going to be a lot of examples. In fact, many of the rest of the rows do fall in kingdom Protista. Amoeba, Spirogyra, fucus, red algae, plasma. Oh, keep looking. There's a spot for the phylum in the characteristics. Yeah, that's on the next slide. Push the button. The amoeba is in phylum Sarcodina, with characteristics that it has pseudopodia. If you're not up on your Latin, pseudo is false and podia is feet. The amoeba will actually push some cytoplasm into some little appendages, feet, and then slowly ooze towards that foot. Yeah, it's a little weird way of locomotion, but that is the way they move. Spirogyra is in kingdom Protista with its characteristics and ditto marks. It's in phylum Chlorophyta. The characteristics of Chlorophyta would be some green algae. Oh, look at the little green algae. Note the cytoplasm does actually spiral, giving it the name of Spirogyra. Red algae would be in phylum Rhodophyta, which literally means red algae. Well, at least it's got the same characteristics as the organism does for the title. Rhodo refers to red. Phyta is not exactly algae, but yeah, many algae have phyta in their title. Fucus is some brown algae. Brown algae would be in phylum Phaeophyta. Pheo refers to brown. Phyta is still often some sort of plant or algae. Fucus is actually a brown algae seaweed type of thing. There are many different species of Plasmodium. They're all in kingdom Protista. They're in phylum Sporozoa. The characteristics would be no means of locomotion. That's actually a little weird. They don't have cilia or flagella or fake feet. They're just kind of floating on the sea of life. Oh wait, sorry, wrong video. Plasmodium species are the species that cause malaria. When you look at the picture, the bigger red blood cells are unfortunately slightly purple. Those are the red blood cells. The little small purple rings on the inside would be the Plasmodium species. They can cause malaria. Mosquitoes would transmit the Plasmodium species by sucking out some blood, red blood cells. The Plasmodium species live in the mosquito for about 2 weeks, and then when they go to bite the next person, they can accidentally inject some Plasmodium species of protist into the next person, which then gets in their red blood cells and causes malaria and keeps the chain going and going and going. A euglena is a small microscopic protist in phylum Euglenophyta. At least they've got the same sort of name. One of the characteristics of phylum Euglenophyta is that it has an eyespot. Most of them also have some chlorophyll in them, which makes them look rather plant-like. That's probably why they have the phyta in the title, is they look plant-like. But in a lot of ways, they're more like animals. They're a little weird. They do have an eye spot. It is not an eyeball like us humans have. It is not going to see actual images. But it does, however, let the euglena notice if there's light in one direction or dark in the other. I'm not sure which way he wants to go, but he can tell the difference between an area that has light and an area that has dark. So it is kind of the first hint of an eyeball. Trypanosoma brucelli is in phylum Zooflagellate. Again, thank God it's not an oral exam. You just have to recognize the names. Phylum Zooflagellate has characteristics of one flagella. Some of these organisms will have one long flagella like, say, a sperm, but many of them will be like this Trypanosoma brucelli that has an undulating membrane along the expanded portion of the cell. He's got a weird flagella, but he does have one flagella. Trypanosoma brucelli is the protozoan that causes African sleeping sickness. We don't have too much of a problem with it in this country, but it is in many African countries carried by the tsetse fly, who, kind of like the mosquito and the malaria parasite, the tsetse fly can bite somebody with this Trypanosoma brucelli protist, suck out their blood and the protozoan. It spends some time in the tsetse fly as part of its life cycle, and then the next time the fly bites somebody, it could inject this protozoan into the next person. Ultimately, you have some interesting symptoms. Most people go a little lethargic, lose interest in just about everything, and kind of sleep to death, hence the name of the disease. Paramecium species are in phylum Ciliaphora, which has characteristics of cilia of all things, many short microtubules for locomotion. If you look on the picture on the left, you can see all the small cilia. If you look at the picture on the right, where it's under the microscope, you may not be able to distinguish all the little teeny tiny hairs. But if you see something that is not a figment of your imagination, that's probably some cilia. The good news is paramecium species actually eat bacteria, so they're kind of good for you there. I wouldn't eat them on their own, but when they're living on your skin, they're doing good things for you. Diatoms are in phylum Chrysophyta, which have a silica shell. Silica is kind of the active ingredient in glass. These guys have kind of a scratchy shell on them. You might have heard of them. Sometimes they'll put diatomaceous earth in the swimming pool filters. They're putting diatoms in there, and the water goes over the filter system with the diatoms with their silica shell, which actually kind of scratches any of the algae and kills the algae. Used to be diatoms in a lot of the cleaning products. Some of the cleaning products still say won't scratch your countertops and things. Now, that's because the older cleaning supplies often had diatoms with their scratchy silica shell in them. Diatoms do come in all sorts of a wide variety of shapes and sizes and colors. The picture shows a representative sample. The species that cause red tides do actually have a scientific name that is completely and utterly unpronounceable. Well, just leave it as species that cause red tides. They're in phylum Dinoflagellate, which has characteristics of two flagella. Di refers to two, flagellate would be flagella. Why there's a no in there, I don't know. Look at the di and the flagellate, don't look at the dino like the dinosaur. But these guys would have two flagella. If you've just got one dinoflagellate like the picture on the left, it really doesn't have that much of a red color. But when you put trillions and trillions and trillions of these species that cause red tides together in an ocean or the Gulf of Mexico, you can actually see the red color. Many of these dinoflagellates will put off some toxins and poisons. If you get some of the cheesier, weenier ones, they might cause some interesting symptoms where you've got a reversal of hot and cold symptoms. So it feels cold in August and hot in January, reversal of hot and cold. Some of the more dangerous ones will put out some toxins that can depress the respiratory system to the point where you don't breathe. Ooh, not good. Every few years we have a couple of red tides that are produced off the coast of, off the Gulf of Mexico and off of several coasts on several of the states. And a lot of times they'll warn people not to eat the fish that wash up on the shore. There's no such thing as a free lunch. If something's going to kill the fish, it's probably going to kill you to eat the fish. Don't eat the dead fish. If you're eating a live fish that you caught, that one's not so much of a problem, but don't eat the dead fish that wash up on the shore, especially around a red tide. Rhizopus is officially in phylum Zygomycota. The characteristics of the phylum is that it has zygospores. What's a zygospore? First of all, it's not on the handout, but check with your lecture instructor on the lecture notes. A zygospore is going to be a reproductive structure for some fungus. See, when a mommy fungus loves a daddy fungus, actually it's when a plus fungus and a minus fungus get together, they will create a reproductive structure called a zygospore. These exist mostly in Rhizopus, which is also known as black bread mold. If we were in lab, I'd have warned you to stay away from the black bread mold, and please don't eat anything you find in non-science majors lab, because we've had that piece of toast for a long time. Saccharomycetes cerevisiae is better known as baker's yeast. It's in phylum Ascomycota. The characteristics would be a sac fungus. Asco refers to sac, and mycota would be fungi. Now, this is not like you've got a plastic bag at the grocery store, not that kind of sac, although the picture on the left clearly does have a depression. The sac fungus, when the plus fungus loves a minus fungus, it does create some spores. The spores are enclosed in a small microscopic sac. That's where the name comes from. But I just think of the grocery store bag. I'm not sure how much groceries you'd be able to put in that sac fungus on the left. It looks a little small. But Ascomycota, sac fungi. Like I said, you're probably more familiar with baker's yeast, brewer's yeast, that sort of thing, would all be Saccharomycetes cerevisiae. Your classic mushroom and some puffballs would be in phylum Basidiomycota. Basidio refers to a club, and mycota would be fungus. So this is a club fungus. Not exactly a dance club. And technically, it doesn't refer to the stem of the mushroom. Don't try to beat somebody up by the club of the fungus there. You're probably not going to hurt anybody with the mushroom. But yeah, it does have a stem on it. Technically, it has to do with the stem on the spores underneath the gill. Oh, just look at the club on the mushroom. Many mushrooms are edible. If you're finding a mushroom in the grocery store, you should be fine. If you're finding a mushroom in your backyard, you probably shouldn't eat it. If you do spot the bright red or orange mushrooms on the left, please don't eat those. Those are poisonous. The puffball on the right, this ain't fear factor. I ain't eating it either. But you should be fine with the mushrooms that are in the grocery store. Penicillin is a fungus that makes an antibiotic. It's in phylum Deuteromycota. The characteristics would be imperfect fungi. Deutero refers to imperfect, mycota is still fungi. On the imperfect part, many fungi can do sexual and asexual reproduction, but these guys are only going to be able to do asexual reproduction. So they're pretty much all clones of each other. They do make an antibiotic that's used to fight off many bacterial infections. Also, penicillin is used, the fungi is used to flavor many cheeses and other assorted food items. That's all we've got for today. Come back next week and we'll learn about plant kingdom. When studying for the exam, we can ask a whole bunch of questions, including the definitions on the first page of the handout, but we can also have a picture of any of the organisms. We could ask you to identify the organism. What kingdom is it in? What phylum is it in? What are the characteristics of the kingdom or phylum that it's in? This one happens to be an amoeba. It's in kingdom Protista. It's in phylum Sarcodina. The characteristics of the kingdom, I forgot those. Unicellular, eukaryotic, motile. The characteristics of the phylum would be that it has pseudopodia, false feet. We could ask that for any of the organisms that we saw on the handout or the pictures here. Study hard.